Good morning, my friends. Welcome back from spring break. I hope you had a good time enjoying the wonderful sunshine and your families. And this week we're going to focus on some books that I have about spring animals. And this is one of Mr. Miller's favorite books. This is called Make Way for Ducklings. How many words were in that title? Listen again. Make way for ducklings. Did you count 4 words? Me too. The author and illustrator is Robert McCloskey, and this book has a special award. Let's see what this says. The Caldecott Medal. And this is an old book that won an award quite a while ago. And I'm going to open it up. We're going to see how old this book is. Here we have our title page. And then this page tells us when the book was written. This says 1941. That was almost 80 years ago. So maybe you have grandparents that heard this book when they were children. And here's this book actually has another title page. Let's read the title together. Make Way for Ducklings. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for a place to live. But every time Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There were sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there might be foxes or turtles. So they flew on and on. And I bet if you've been looking out in the sky, you're seeing ducks fly by. Have any of you taken a walk past a lake or a reservoir where the ducks are floating? This might even be a good time of year to look for some baby ducks in the water. Do you think we'll see some baby ducks in this story? Do you remember the name of those baby ducks in the title? Make way for ducklings. That's right. Baby ducks are called ducklings. So let's see if they can find a good home for their ducklings. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further. There was a nice pond in the public garden with a little island on it. The very place to spend the night, quacked Mr. Mallard. So down they flapped. Next morning, they fished for their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find much. What kind of breakfast do you think those ducks are fishing for? Look how they dip their heads underwater and stick their tail feathers in the air. What do you think they're looking for? Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. Enormous, that's a big word. Here's our ducklings. And here's the bird that the author says is enormous. What do you think enormous means? Do you think it means big? Or do you think it means small? That's right, big. That is a big bird. The bird was pushing a boat full of people, and there was a man sitting on its back. Good morning, quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The big bird was too proud to answer, but the people on the boat threw peanuts into the water, so the Mallards followed them all around the pond and got another breakfast, better than the first. I like this place, said Mrs. Mallard, as they climbed out on the bank and waddled along. See our ducks right there? Are they in the water or are they on land? They climbed out on the bank. The bank is the land around the water. Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond? There are no foxes and no turtles, and the people feed us peanuts. What could be better? Said Mrs. Mallard. Good, said Mr. Mallard, delighted that at last Mrs. Mallard had found a place that suited her. She finally liked somewhere. But, what could go wrong? "Look out!" squawked Mrs. Mallard, all of a dither. She was quite upset. What could be upsetting her in this picture? "You'll get run over," she said. And when she got her breath, she added, "Oh, this is no place for babies. With all those horrid things rushing about, we'll have to look somewhere else." What's the horrid thing that scared Mrs. Mallard? I think that bike is pretty scary. That bike could hurt a duckling. So they flew over the buildings at Beacon Hill and around the State House, but there was no place there. Is a busy city a good place for ducklings? They looked in Louisburg Square, but there was no water to swim in. Ducklings need water, don't they? Then they flew over the Charles River. "This is better," quacked Mr. Mallard. "That island looks like a nice quiet place, and it's only a little way from the public garden." Do you see the island there? "Yes," said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. "That looks like just the right place to hatch ducklings." So they chose a cozy spot among the bushes near the water and settled down to build their nest. And only just in time, for now they were beginning to molt. I wonder what molt means. Let's keep reading and see if the author tells us. All their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly again until the new ones grew in. So the ducks lost their feathers, and the author tells us that is called molting. It's kind of like shedding. But of course they could swim, and one day they swam over to the park on the riverbank, and there they met a policeman called Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after that the Mallards called on Michael every day. After Mrs. Mallard had laid 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs and keep them warm. Let's see if we can count those eggs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 eggs. So how many ducklings will they have? 8 ducklings. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water, or to have her lunch, or to count the eggs and make sure they were all there, just like we did. One day the ducklings hatched out. First came Jack, then Cack, then Lack, then Mack, and Knack, and Quack, and Pack, and Whack. What do we notice about all those words? Cack, Lack, Mack. Those are rhyming words. We have a whole word family there. If you want to pause the video and see if you can write down some ack words on your own. What sounds would I need? Let's think about the word Mac. A, k. 3 sounds. I bet you could make an ack family. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was a great responsibility taking care of so many ducklings, and it kept them very busy. How many ducklings did they have? Let's see if we can find them all. Will you count with me? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and there's one hiding right under her leg. 8. One day, Mr. Mallard decided he'd like to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like further on. So off he set. "I'll meet you in a week in the public garden," he quacked over his shoulder. "Take good care of the ducklings." "Don't you worry," said Mrs. Mallard. "I know all about bringing up children." And she did. So there goes Mr. Mallard. She's going to stay with the ducklings. She taught them how to swim and dive. Do you remember why they need to dive? What are they looking for down there? Food, that's right. She taught them to walk in line, to come when they were called, and to keep a safe distance from bikes and scooters and other things with wheels. When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me." And before you could wink an eyelash, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack fell into line just as they had been taught. I hope you listen to your mom the way these ducklings listen to their mom. Moms sure know how to keep us safe, and so do dads. Mrs. Mallard led the way into the water, and they swam behind her to the opposite bank. Do we still have 8 ducklings? Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Do you see a group there? Do we have a line down the middle? How many do we have on this side? 3, and how many on this side? 5. So I see an addition sentence there. 5 plus 3 equals 8. Good job. There they waded ashore and waddled along until they came to the highway. Is this a safe place for ducklings? Why would Mom be leading them that way? Mrs. Mallard stepped out to cross the road. Beep, beep, went the horns on the speeding cars. Quack, went Mrs. Mallard as she tumbled back again. Quack, 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 went Lack, Cack, Mack, Jack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack, just as loud as their little quackers could quack. The cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on quacking. I wonder why they don't just turn around and go back. They made such a noise that Michael came running, waving his arms and blowing his whistle. Do you remember Michael? What was his job? He's a policeman, that's right. He planted himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop traffic, and then beckoned with the other, the way policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross the road. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and on their way down Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. He called Clancy at headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." Clancy said, "Family of what?" "Ducks," yelled Michael. "Send a police car quick." Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop and turned into Charles Street with Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack all marching in line behind her. There they go, down the road, past the bookstore. Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Isn't it amazing?" And the man who swept the street said, "Well now, ain't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud, she tipped her nose in the air and walked along with an extra swing in her waddle. She was very proud. Can you do a little proud waddle? Put your nose in the air. You're proud. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was the police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from headquarters. Do we see the 4 policemen? They're all stopping traffic. The policemen held back. Hi, Roswell. There's my dog, Roswell. He likes stories, too. The policemen held back the traffic so Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings could march across the street. Right into the public garden. Do you remember the public garden? That nice home they had found with the peanuts, and there they go. Inside the gate, they all turned around to say thank you to the policeman. The policeman smiled and waved goodbye. When they reached the pond and swam across to the little island, there was Mr. Mallard waiting for them just as he had promised. That's why they couldn't turn around and go back. They had to get to this wonderful island where their dad was. The ducklings liked the new island so much that they decided to live there. All day long, they follow the swan boats and eat peanuts. Remember that enormous bird? Was it a real bird at all? It was part of this boat. And when night falls, they swim to their little island and go to sleep. There they go, all 8 little ducklings. And that's the end of our book, Make Way for Ducklings. Now before we end, I'm going to give you something to write down in your journal or on your paper. And I want you to think about a perfect home for ducklings. What would you have there? Would you have bikes and cars? Would you have trees? Would you have fish in the water? Peanuts floating? And I want you to think about what that perfect home looks like. And we're going to write the sentence. Let's read it. A duck lives here. And when we write our sentence, let's look at some things. What do I have at the end of my sentence? Period. Between my words, do I have finger spaces? Yeah. And then think about, when do I use an uppercase letter? And when do I use lowercase letters? Those mean something, and we need to use them in the right way. Our sentence should always start with an uppercase letter. And then most of the other letters are going to be lowercase. Do you see any other uppercase letters here? No. If I have my name in here, I might use an uppercase letter. But most of the time, we're just going to start with uppercase, and the rest will be lowercase. So today in your journal, can you watch those things for me? Let's go over it again. Period at the end, finger spaces, starting with an uppercase, and the rest are going to be lowercase. So see if you can write your sentence just like this. If you want to pause the video and get your paper, write your sentence copying mine, that's fine too. Or maybe you can do it from memory. If I put this down, do you remember what you're writing? All right, go ahead, friends, and get started on your journal. And I'd love to see pictures, so have mom or dad or grandma or grandpa send me a picture. Bye.